Friends, we gather together this afternoon to celebrate the life and to honor the memory of George Morris. George's family so very much appreciates your presence here this afternoon. As we all know, during difficult times in our lives, when words always seem inadequate, it's the presence of each of us to each other that offers the needed support and comfort. Thank you for being here.
מזמור לדוד, אדוני רואי לא אחסר, בינות אשר ביצני על מי מנוחות ינחלני, נפשי ישובב, ינחני ומגלה צדק למען שמו, גם כי הלך בגץ המוות, לא ירא רע, כי אתה עמדי. שבטך ומשענתך המה ינחמוני. תערוך לפני שולחן נגד צורריי, דשנת ושמן ראשי כוסי רוויה, אך טוב וחסד ידיפוני כל ימי חיי, ושבתי בבית אדוני לאורך ימים.
Adonai ma'adam v'teda'ehu ben enosh v'chashvehu. O Lord, what are we that you have regard for us? What are we that you are mindful of us? We are like a breath, our days are like a passing shadow. We come and we go like grass, which in the morning shoots up renewed, in the evening it fades and it withers. You cause us to turn to dust, saying, return, you mortal creatures. Would that we were wise, that we understood whither we are going. For when we die, we carry nothing away. Our glory does not accompany us. Mark the wholehearted and behold the upright. They shall have peace. The author of the first of the Bible's 150 Psalms describes for us, in language that is both poignant and succinct, the nature of the good life and the fruits of that life. Happy are those who have not followed the counsel of the wicked or taken the path of sinners or joined the company of the insolent. Rather, the teaching of God is their delight, and they study that teaching day and night. They are like a tree planted beside streams of water that yields its fruit in its season, whose foliage never fades, and whose fruit always flourishes. All of us know the 23rd Psalm, one of the most famous poems in any language, and it's deservedly famous, and I just want to make one brief comment about why. I've often asked myself, how old was the poet who wrote this psalm? And I certainly know that that poet was not 18 or 20 or 25, because this psalm is the distillation of a life long lived and long experienced. And what the psalmist has to say to us, among other things, is God is not going to solve the problems that befall us, the problems of life, but there is grounds for hope. And one of those foundations for hope is, as I said a few minutes ago, the presence of each of us to the other. There are 55 Hebrew words in this psalm. An uneven number in a list suggests a middle term. The 28th word of this psalm is atah. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Ki atah imadi, for you are with me. And in the Jewish spirit of the imitation of God's acts, we are called upon to be a you to another person when that person is suffering. Please join me in the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Kohelet, who is the author of the biblical book of Ecclesiastes, reminds us that for everything there is a season, a time for every experience under the heavens, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to grieve and a time to dance, a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to discard, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak. We lost a precious individual this past Friday afternoon, our beloved George Morris. He made a deep and indelible impression on all who knew and loved him, and we will miss him. George was born and raised in Scranton, Pennsylvania. After graduating from Mayors High School, he attended Wilkes College with a major in political science. Soon after college, he met the love of his life, Franny Schiff, while he was working as a bellhop at the Pines Hotel in the Catskills. And they were married on October 4th, 1964, thus beginning a union that spanned 59 and a half years before George died this past Friday afternoon. After serving in the Army Reserves and then working for 5 years in the insurance business in Yonkers, New York, the young couple moved to Cleveland so that George could pursue an opportunity in the men's clothing business. And then from 1974 until January of this year, George plied his trade as a premier and storied salesman. And though he began to travel early in his career, George, according to his children, always stayed close enough to home so that he could be at home to have dinner with Fran and his young children, David, Jill, and Cindy. All our father wanted to do, his daughter Cindy remarked, was to make a nice living for his family. Now, when I met with George's adoring family last night, and asked them to describe to me the person they knew and loved, they came forth with a torrent of revealing adjectives. He was, they said, hardworking, driven, jazzy, funny, quick-witted, charming, family-oriented, and perfectly coiffed. George's sister, Linda, recalled how as a child George would bound down the stairs in the morning and how mischievous he was. And, now I quote Linda directly, how funny and how loyal as a friend he was, and simply what a good guy he was. And the mischievous side of George Morris remained, as many of you know, vibrant to the very end. His family remarked almost in unison how George would tell a visitor when it was time to leave, whether the visitor was a friend or a family member, he would tell that visitor, and now I quote, "Will you check to see if the front door works?" And this half-serious, half-joking response was reinforced by his favorite front door mat with a simple imperative: go away. Or when he was in the midst of his fight against cancer, he would sometimes answer the phone with, "Still here." Or when he and Franny would happen to drive past the Mayfield Cemetery, he would wave to his beloved, now deceased cousin, who was also named George Morris, "I'll see you soon." Now, those of you who knew George well know that he was a natural-born salesman. And so when I met with his loving family last night, I asked them to describe the characteristics that made him such a stellar salesman. And this is how they responded. George was loyal, moral, humble, honest, relationship-oriented, and a gentleman. He loved and he cared about his customers. And when one of them was unable to afford merchandise for his store, George would vouch for him to the manufacturer and back up his customer's requirement with his own support. And if the customer still could not afford the goods and was therefore in danger of going out of business, George called the company he represented and said that he himself would pay for those shirts and ties so that that individual could remain in business until things improved. Going the extra mile, not out of self-interest, but out of his genuine concern for his client, who was also his friend. In turn, George's clients adored him. And so at recent trade shows in Chicago and Minneapolis, shows that George was too sick to attend, the talk at those gatherings, Franny, you told me last night, was George's illness and how sad they all were that their dear friend of so many decades was declining so rapidly. Indeed, George, in his humility, had no idea how many and how deeply people loved him. In fact, after George died, one of his longtime customers, Larry Rubin, wrote a heartfelt letter to George's family about George. Now, I must confess that my original intention in having that letter in front of me was to quote excerpts from it. But as I read it over, I saw that this tribute was worth quoting in its entirety because it powerfully distills the essence and the grandeur of George Morris. Here is that letter verbatim. For over 30 years, I owned and operated a small men's clothing store in Pittsburgh. For most of that time, my resources for neckwear, for outerwear, and shirts were lines, a.k.a. manufacturers, with names like Wembley, Rainforest, and others. At my first trade show, soon after I bought my business, I met a salesman named George Morris. From the moment I met George, my resources for shirts and ties and outerwear ceased to be brands like Wembley and Rainforest my resources became concentrated in George Morris himself. The brand name of the merchandise was incidental, of much less significance than George's endorsement. Over the years, George became the brand, the label. If George carried the line, the product was good. If George said, Larry, you should have this in your store, it meant that I should have it in my store. Why? Because George Morris had integrity. He believed in and stood behind his product. He understood and knew his customer, his customer's store, his customer's inventory needs, and his customer's inventory limits. There was no such technique as pressure, only suggestion. George was the benchmark, the role model for exemplary salesmanship. He was punctual. He displayed extraordinary patience when the retail rhythm of the store and its customers disrupted his rhythm. His honesty and respect for others was paramount. For many salespeople, their customer is only as good as their credit or their last sale. Not for George. Not for this salesman or roadman, as he often called himself. George Morris judged his customers the same way he himself was judged, by their integrity, by the way his customers valued respect and kindness, and by being true to their word, not, I repeat, not by the size of their order. The proof, though not needed, was even deeper when it was an even deeper friendship that George and I maintained long after I had closed my business. Many, many long conversations over coffee on his business trips to Pittsburgh. Those conversations gave me an even deeper knowledge of George, his devotion, his love and closeness to his family, his growing closeness to his faith, and the yearning for more learning about its principles and its tenets. Gone were the conversations about dozens, about paisleys and widths and stripes and spread and button-down collars, about price increases or price decreases. Now we talked about Passover Seders, the Parsha of the week, Shabbos afternoons, and the best of humanity. Those conversations underlined and put into bold print that George Morris found the good in people, accepted people as they are, and he would never stop appreciating them. It might be appropriate, Larry goes on to say and to conclude, to stop here by saying that George's death is the death of a salesman, or a roadman, as he would say. But I say that George's death is the death of a mensch. Now, as most of you know, George was afflicted with a dire diagnosis 4.5 years ago, stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The prognosis? That he would succumb to this dread disease within a few months. To this, George responded simply, no. From the beginning, he was determined to fight the disease, and fight hard he did. He consulted with his doctors here in Cleveland. He traveled out of state when he learned that certain physicians had a state-of-the-art procedure that just might help him. He followed the suggestions of his doctors to the letter, and he pursued brand new treatments. He fought hard, and he always expressed deep gratitude to his physicians. Indeed, George Morris would not go down without a fight, and he survived to be able to live his life for 4.5 years. And yet, when his doctors told him there was nothing more they could do for him, he accepted the verdict with dignity and with grace. And when I came to spend some time with him, he told me that he was at peace and that he was ready to die. Yet even when he was very near the end and himself at peace, his body had become too accustomed to fight to give up. And George outlasted the prediction of the physicians and nurses by another 5 days. He was ready to go, but his body would not give up the fight. Now he is at peace, and we are grateful for his life, which blessed us all, and grateful that he suffers no longer. George Morris is survived by his wife, Franny, by his son, David, and his daughters, Jill and Cindy, by his daughter-in-law, Karen, and his son-in-law, Steve, by his sister, Linda, and his brother-in-law, Gary, and by his grandchildren, Max, Jake, Jamie, Alex, Casey, and Sammy. He was predeceased by his parents, Rachel and Butch. It is an understatement to say that George Morris lived a big life and that he touched so many people, so many of us who are gathered here today. His loss leaves a vacuum in the hearts of those who loved and admired him. Yet we find comfort in knowing that the memory of this wonderful man will always animate both our lives and our desire to live lovingly and well. We will never forget him. Zichrono livracha, the life of George Morris, will always be our blessing. Amen. And I want to call on several people who will reflect on the life, the qualities, and the accomplishments of George Morris. First, it's my pleasure and honor to welcome forward Rabbi Chaim Feld.
I'm not here in an official capacity. I'm here as a close family friend. 14 years ago, my wife interviewed the sisters for a trip to go to Israel. My wife said to me, she met these very nice, quiet girls. When they get to Israel, my wife hears howling and laughter coming out of this room, and that was the start of a very, very close relationship. Everyone that the sisters know has a nickname, so we met the Guy and George. George started to come for Shabbos. He had his own seat in our house. He loved coming. He loved the company. He loved the conversation. And he especially loved the cholent. We became very close. They came to almost every wedding in the family. They schlepped to Lakewood, New Jersey. I like to think that George actually held on so he could go to Shoshi's wedding a few months ago. I loved George, Joseph Mendel. He reminded me of my grandfather, not as a grandfather, but my grandfather as a person. My grandfather was dapper. George was dapper. His shoes, his socks, his pants, his shirt, his jacket, his hair, he was always put together. And it was a problem if I gave him a compliment on some of his clothes because he would literally take it off, right? The expression, he would take his shirt off his back for you. Literally every Shabbos, I couldn't compliment him because he'd end up with a piece of clothing in my house. This is his tie. I love to listen to George speak. He was a great conversationalist, a great schmoozer. I loved his vocabulary, and he was very articulate. But it was his recall of dates and events. He would rattle off dates and events like it happened last week. Family was very important to him. He was very, very blessed. It was also important to him and Franny to instill a strong Jewish identity into their kids. Although they lived in Mentor, they were successful in instilling that Jewish pride in them. It was their devotion to their shul in Mentor. Jill would always speak about the Tells Rebbitzins that would come and teach them. George was a walking miracle. He lived much longer and had a good quality of life for these extra years. I went to visit him 2 weeks ago to wrap tefillin, and he was sitting in his chair looking dapper. This guy had multiple chemo treatments, and he still had much more hair than me. You know, I think Hashem knew that it was important that he kept his hair. I think it was extremely hard for him the last week, when he couldn't fully be himself. Franny, Jill, Cindy, David, and all the grandkids, you should know you were amazing. You showed such respect. You did everything in the most respectful way. We're going to celebrate Purim in 2 weeks. When Esther was taken to the palace, the Jewish people panicked. In the end, it turned out for the good. The Almighty has taken Yosef Mendel back to his palace. We believe he's in a good place, and he wants you to know that you should all be comforted. His memory should be a blessing.
Now I want to call on George's children. First of all, his son David. And his daughters, Jill and Cindy.
Well, first of all, thank you all for coming today. It means a tremendous amount to our family that you've taken time to celebrate my dad. For those of you who knew my father, you know he would hate this. I mean, beside the obvious of him being dead here right now, him being the center of attention, people making a fuss over him and his family. He'd probably say things like, "What are you doing here? Don't you have anything better to do? Just get out of here." And all right, are we done yet? And when he'd really had enough of being somewhere and wanted you to leave, he had a not so subtle way, but funny way of letting you know. He'd simply say, "Scranton out," a reference to his hometown of Scranton, Pennsylvania. was my dad. He's direct, to the point, and at times not so subtle. And probably the thing I love the most about him. He was an enigma of sorts to me. He could be a man of few words at home, which simply may come down to the fact that my mom wouldn't let him get a word in when all of us were around, especially the grandchildren. Yet he could also speak at serious length to anyone about anything when he chose to do so. So I knew when I'd get on the phone with my dad, it was going to go one of two ways. He'd get on the phone and be like, "Everything all right? Great. Chat with you later." And literally would hang up the phone. I mean, literally 10 seconds max. Or it might be a 10 minutes plus soliloquy on any possible topic. When the man was on a roll, he was on a roll. And he was incredibly hardworking from the time he was in his teens till just a few weeks before he passed. It's what got him through the last 4 years. It was his purpose in the most positive of ways. And my dad loved his job. He loved the people. He loved his career. He loved you all. Some of you more than others. My dad loved his family. Again, some of you more than others. And he'd really be pissed that we'd all be sitting around here right now saying really nice things about him. And I just keep thinking if he could, he would literally just get up, say "Scranton out," and walk right out that door.
I also want to thank everybody for coming here today. It means the world to us. And as David said, my dad would say, "What the heck are you guys doing here?" There's some things that there's no words for, at least in the English language. My father's strength is one of them. My dad was the hardest worker I ever knew. When I was a little girl, I was my daddy's little girl. He was hilarious, and we were hilarious together. His laugh was infectious. He had great pride for his family, his business, and for being a Jew. As I became a young adult, my dad said to me, "There's not anything in the world that you can do that I haven't already done." I spent a good decade or two trying to prove him wrong. Baruch Hashem, I came to my senses to figure out that's not what life is about. 4 years ago, almost to today, Sammy and I were blessed to move in with my folks. This was one of the greatest gifts in my life, next to getting to be one of his caregivers. Even though there were hard things going on in our lives and in the world, there was no other place I'd rather be than right by his side, hundreds of days, hundreds of hours, whether it was chemo or a doctor's appointments, watching him fight the hardest fight of his life. My dad taught me many things. The most important thing in life was his Rolex. Quite the opposite. Material things were not important, although he walked around with such refinement and he was impeccably dressed. I like to think of the garments he wore that truly defined him were humility, honesty, strong work ethic, and pride in his family. He taught me that health was the most important thing and never, ever let cancer define him. My dad was funny. He was extra funny because he was funny and the things he said were true. He would say things like, "You know, I never met an atheist in a foxhole." And we would joke about how funny and good looking He was, and I said, it's a gift and a curse, and he said, it is never a curse. Which is funny because he was so humble. Thank you, Dad, for teaching me how important and precious life is and to never take it for granted. He would often say, no one is promised tomorrow. Our tomorrows will never be the same. I do know we can get through anything because we are the Marses. I love you, Dad. And may we meet with Mashiach. Wow. Not really sure how to follow that. I also would like to thank everyone for coming today and respecting my dad. If I had to describe my dad, I would break it down into 3 categories: religion, family, work. Not sure the order. He was proud to be Jewish, not just in culture, but tradition and learning. He loved going to Friday night services in person or streaming when he was physically unable to be there. He also talked about Torah study with Rabbi Klein on Saturday mornings, as well as all the Shabbos lunches at the Felds. You all really embraced him. When he began studying, he was amazed there was so much good information in the Talmud and why he didn't learn this stuff sooner. He was an avid learner. He took great pride in his family. All he ever wanted was to provide for us to ensure our comfort and well-being, as Rabbi Klein spoke. My dad was the one I could talk to. We had an unspoken understanding. I may or may not have had a few tantrums. As a child, hence my nickname, Boo. And my dad, well, he just got me. He didn't try to talk me out of my meltdowns. He'd just wait until I calmed down and gave me a hug. You've already heard about the legend he was in the industry and with his customers. What you may not know is that in addition to his customers, he was also well known at some of the hotels he stayed. One woman who regularly checked him in used to call him Mr. Crispy. He was jazzy. We both shared a love of running. His crowning moment was completing the New York City Marathon in 1987. He and I shared many early morning runs and 10Ks together. Not much was said, only the patter of feet hitting the pavement, an understanding silence, and a feeling of being unconditionally loved. The summer after my freshman year at college, I worked at a camp in Vermont and ran a race. Sister Jill found a letter in his office, or the pit, as he called it, with my completion ribbon, because everybody got a prize, letting him know running was not the same without him. I can't believe he kept this over 40 years. Dad always answered his phone when his customers called. It didn't matter whether he was at chemo or at the ER. When the nurses tried to talk to him, take his vitals, he'd make them wait, letting them know he had things to do, which superseded anything they might need. When he went into remission, it was really cute. We'd have some conversations, and he'd go, "Georgie boy's not done here yet. He still has a lot to do." He was a funny man. He really was. Last year, my dad, Sister Jill, and I took a New York roadie, and we do love a good roadie. We went to Sloan Kettering to see if he was a candidate for any trials. Unfortunately, there were none. However, the trip was one to be remembered. My dad was a foodie and loved to eat pretty much anything, mostly standing up at the kitchen counter or just grazing in the kitchen. During a good part of his treatment, he lost his joy of eating. But in New York, my dad was back. From pizza to deli to bakery, it was such a pleasure. He enjoyed every minute, as did we, especially the extra ketchup on his brisket sandwich. Growing up, we never had a bring your kid to work day, so I was fortunate to be my dad's chauffeur on his last business trip to West Virginia. About a 6-hour ride round trip. He was quiet and sleeping most of the way, but when we got to his customers, he was a new man. He was in his happy place, doing what he loved, and was incredibly good at it. This is his hanky. Dad, I'm grateful for all the extra time we were able to share and to be able to tell you how much I admired and loved you. From the time I was born until the time you took your last breaths, surrounded by us reciting the Shema. I'm so proud and humbled to be your baby girl by 2 minutes. And while you're no longer physically here, I know you'll be watching over us with much nachas and love. I love you and miss you dearly.
Now George's brother-in-law, Gary Spivak.
Hello, everyone. My name is Gary Spivak, and I'm the lucky guy that married George's sister, Linda. I am a Morris now. I must express my appreciation and gratitude for everything that George, Franny, and the kids have done for me and my family over the years. When our daughter, Abby, passed away, George made sure that all of their family traveled to Los Angeles to be with us and to care for Linda, Allison, and me. I was able to hold Sammy as an infant. When I felt her heartbeat against mine, it soothed my broken heart. It was that rarest of moments of contact that gave me joy and helped me move forward. I have never forgotten how this family cared for us in our time of need. George is one of those rare individuals that is worthy of the title of being a good man. He had integrity, passion, compassion, a big heart, and was fiercely loyal to his family. He had a special place in his heart for my daughters, Abby and Allison, and now our granddaughter, Jenna. George taught me many things, and I will tell you that I aspired to be more like him. My family was never as close as the Morris clan. I admired their weekly brunches and how he kept his close relationships with his grandchildren, his cousins, and family. He was the optimist in the Morris family. He encouraged Linda and me to make moves for different job opportunities. At times, his phone calls were the only moments that Linda could laugh through life's challenges. And I am especially grateful for his encouragement and support of my family. Linda and I are members of an egalitarian Chevra Kadisha society in Los Angeles. We ask forgiveness from the deceased for any mistakes that we make during the process of caring for the individual, whether it occurred during the tahara or guarding of the body. We expect no recognition for performing these tasks, and I had the opportunity to ask George for forgiveness in that same spirit if I had offended him. George exemplified these traits of giving without expecting anything in return. George was a light to his families and colleagues which cannot be extinguished. He and his family showered us with their blessings, and for that I am forever grateful. So to you, George, Lila Tov, if the soul can dream, I wish for you to be able to dream of family, peace, and above all, love. Thank you.
Now I want to call on George's 6 grandchildren who together will reflect upon the life and the quality of their grandfather. Max, Jake, Jamie, Alex, Casey, and Sammy.
Today, as we gather to remember and honor the extraordinary life of Papa, I want to share a heartfelt story that encapsulates the depth of the bond we shared. When I was a teenager, and to this day, Papa realized that neither of us were particularly adept at vocalizing our emotions, often finding ourselves overshadowed by the louder voices in the room. In his gentle and thoughtful manner, he confessed that at times, articulating the words "I love you" out loud could feel a bit uncomfortable. He proposed that we create our own secret sign, something that just between the two of us would signify the unspoken words, "I love you." After some contemplation, we settled on the simplest yet powerful gesture, a wink. From that moment forward, whenever we found ourselves at family meals or in the midst of lots of people, Papa and I would exchange knowing winks from across the room. It became our silent language, a shared secret that spoke volumes of the love and understanding we had for each other. In those moments, the room seemed to fade away, and it was just Papa and me sharing an intimate connection that transcended words. The wink became a symbol of our special bond, a reminder that love can be expressed in countless ways, even in the subtlest of gestures. As we say our goodbyes today, let us carry with us the warmth of those exchanged winks and the profound love they represented. Papa's legacy lives on not only in the memories we hold dear, but also in the enduring reminder that love knows no bounds, and sometimes it's the unspoken gestures that leave the most profound impact on our hearts.
The enduring theme in my mind when I think of Papa is love of family. There was no man more loyal, more protective, more caring, or more appreciative of family than Papa, and I think that's been shown here today. One memory I wanted to share is the time that we took a road trip, just the two of us, to Temple University in Philadelphia. I was looking at schools, and there was a professor at Temple who ran the program that I was interested in. He was only able to meet on a specific date in a specific time. No one else was able to go, but Papa volunteered, put his hand up and said, "I love a good road trip." So we went. The driving was uneventful. Talking with the professor was fine, who actually forgot my name, but neither here nor there. But what I remember most is afterwards. We stopped on our way back in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania, and tried Shake Shack for the first time, the foodie that he is. Now, those that know Papa know that when he had a good meal, he started to moan a little bit. And he was in heaven chowing down on his Shack burger. And as we were eating and chatting, he looked at me dead in the eyes and said, "Who's got it better than us, sport?" No one does. No one did. I'll never forget those words and always take them to heart because no one had it better than us, being Papa's grandchildren. Love you, Papa.
So some of my favorite memories with Papa come from small things like car rides or just sitting down at a restaurant, just the two of us. When Max, Jamie, and I went off to college, we were all kind of near where his accounts were, so he always made sure he would stop and eat with us, even if it was 7:30 in the morning or 9 o'clock at night. He always made sure to be there for us. One place we like to go in Toledo is this little greasy hole-in-the-wall diner that everybody says pretty much don't go there. It's not that great. No matter how much we ate we would walk out paying less than $10, $15. So, you know it's good. The diner we ate at had, like, the only thing people would recommend there is their pie. And on your birth week, you would get a free piece of pie. With Papa's diet that the doctors told him to keep, we never really got to eat our pie except for one birthday. We sat down, shared a piece of pecan pie, and he went on his way. Although it might have been 8 in the morning. And it might not seem like that big of a deal. I'm really glad I got to sit down with him and have a piece of pie with my grandpa. And it still remains my favorite memory to this day.
This is a first for us too. Navigating grief within our very close family, as it's been repeated multiple times today, extremely emphasized. Our Papa was the embodiment of resilience. Battling cancer, he showed us what it really means to fight, to cling to life with every ounce of strength, not just for himself, but for all of us. If stubbornness were an Olympic sport, Papa definitely would have taken home a gold medal every year. Our Papa's tenacity became something of a family legend, and Alex and I would joke that the reason we haven't ever really processed a loss like this before was simply because our Papa was too stubborn to let anything, even cancer, beat him. I can't swear here. He was a son of a gun. He gifted us time to be together as a family, time to learn more lessons from him, time to love him and him us. As us grandkids face a new reality, we do so knowing that his legacy is not one of sadness. This is not a sad story, but one of incredible strength and a lot of love. He showed us how to face challenges head on, how to really be there for family, and most importantly, how to love fiercely, but those who deserve it. So let's celebrate the remarkable life he led and the enormous marks he's left on each of our hearts. Papa, thank you for every lesson, every laugh, every moment of love. You've created a supremely tight-knit family. For that, you can never get rid of. And I can never thank you enough. Thank you all.
There are stars up above, so far away we only see their light. Long, long after the star itself is gone. And so it is with people that we loved. Their memories keep shining ever brightly, though their time with us is done. But the stars that light up the darkest night, these are the lights that guide us as we live our days. These are the ways we remember as we live our days. These are the ways we remember. יש כוכבים שמגיע ארצה, רק כאשר הם עצמם עבדו בינם. יש אנשים שזיו זכרם מאיר, כאשר הם עצמם אינם עוד בתוכנו. אורות אלה המבהיקים בחשכת הליל, הם שמראים לאדם את הדרך, As we live our days, these are the ways we remember, we remember, we remember, we remember.
O God of life, amid the ceaseless tides of change which sweep away the generations, your love remains to comfort us and to give us hope. Around us are life and death, decay and renewal, the flowing rhythm that all things obey. Our life is a dance to a song that we cannot hear. Its melody courses through us for a little while, then it seems to cease. Whence the melody and whither does it go? In darkness as in light, we turn to you, the source of life and the answer to all of life's mysteries. As you are able, I invite you now to rise for the El Mole Rachamim.
El Mole Rachamim, shochen bamromim, amsei menocha nechona tachat kanfei hashchina, במעלות קדושים וטורים, כי זוכר הרקיע מסעירים. את נשמת יוסף מנדל, בן ברוך הרש ורחל, שהלך לעולמו בגן עדן תהא מנוחתו. ענה בה הרחמים אסתירהו, בסתר כנפך לעולמים, בתצרור בתרור החיים את נשמתו. אדוני הוא נחלתו, וינוח בשלום, המשכבו ונאמר Amen.
Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to George Morris, our loved one who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let him find refuge in the shadow of your wings, and let his soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is his inheritance. May he rest in peace, and let us say together, Amen. You may be seated. I want to announce that the family of George Morris will receive friends over several days. First today from 4 in the afternoon till 8 this evening. They will receive friends at the Four Season Community Room at 26600 George Zeiger Drive, Building 3. That's from 4 to 8 tonight. Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday from 1 to 4 and from 6 to 8 at the residence of Cindy Morris at 512 Crystal Lake Drive in Orange. Friday from 1 to 3. And Saturday evening from 8 to 10. If you haven't memorized all these times, you can go online to the Berkowitz-Kumin website, and those times will be reiterated for you. Once again, thank you so much on behalf of the family for your presence here with us this afternoon for this very moving service for a very special human being, and we're just so touched that you are with us. Our service will continue now at gravesite at the Mayfield Cemetery.